Hey, Salvador Brinkman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. On this show, we talk about a lot of things when it comes to Kickstarter, Indiegogo, how to raise funds, but predominantly, I'm really interested in basically introducing you to new techniques, new tools, innovative stuff that's going on in the world of crowdfunding. So sometimes we'll also cover other topics as well. So we might do like equity crowdfunding or interesting new tools that I've discovered. And that's actually kind of the genesis of today's show. I brought on the CEO, the founder of Kickfurther. So Kickfurther, if you're not familiar, it's a really interesting platform that not a lot of people know about. And it's kind of like frustrating that there's this opportunity out there, in my opinion, that not a lot of people have discovered. It's basically, think of it this way. If you need to do a huge minimum order quantity purchase, right, from a factory, you can use Kickstarter. Obviously, you can use Indiegogo. You can use our credit card. You can go with the equity crowdfunding route and raise money in terms of investment dollars in your company. But what if there was a way to do something a little bit different where you actually got other people to finance that minimum order quantity, to actually purchase the inventory, to put up the money? A ton of people, like 1,000 people, put up just a little bit of money, and then that funds this fund that you then use to be able to purchase the inventory from your factory. And as the inventory sells, those people who basically put up the money for you, they get a small cut of that, a small revenue share, you can call it. It's really called consignment, right? But it's kind of like a revenue share, honestly. So think of it could be 5%, it could be 10%, but wouldn't that be cool? Rather than having to, say, borrow money from a credit card to do a huge purchase of inventory and then immediately having to pay back that money from the credit card. Instead, you could actually just crowdsource this thing, crowdfund this thing using Kickfurther. You can get a bunch of money, go and buy all that inventory from the factory, and then as it sells, pay those people back. Doesn't have to be all at once. It can just be as your inventory sells to the public with a little bit of a markup, right? To factor that in. So it's a really interesting platform, and it's something that's still, I think, in the genesis stage. They're doing pretty good revenue, but it's obviously small compared to some of these other platforms out there. So I wanted to introduce you to that today. I think that you're gonna walk away with a lot of good tips and advice as to how to navigate this terrain, figuring out the supply chain side of manufacturing. Supply chain is like the most boring thing in the world, right? Like if I was to sit in on an MBA style conversation on supply chain management, it's like it wants you to just like, that'd be the last thing I think that anyone would be interested in listening to. But this is actually a really fun, interesting, an innovative way to attack that problem. And I kind of bring my same like passion and pizzazz to this portion of getting a product to market. So I hope that you enjoy it and you take some good tangible stuff away. Also, if you're interested in learning more about Kickstarter, I got that great book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula. And at the end of the call, I will share a way, if you want to, you can do a one-on-one coaching call with me, an hour-long intensive call where we go in depth into your project, getting it funded, how to go about doing it, as well as maybe how I could help you and bridge the gap there for you. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. It's coming up right after this. This podcast episode is sponsored by The Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They are Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns, and if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we have an alternative to Kickstarter in the house. This is the entrepreneur and founder of Kickfurther. Sean has come on the show today to basically share with you how not only you can get your product out there to the world, but also with a lot less headaches, and how you can use his platform in order to kind of enable that and also help a little bit with inventory financing. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Salvador. Great to be here.
Definitely, man. So tell me, your platform's been around for a while now, right? A couple of years, at least 2013 or something?
Yeah, so we originally incorporated August 2014, and we did our first deal about 2 months later, back in 2014, yeah.
It looks like it's grown a ton.
Yeah, 6 years will do that to a company. Right?
What are you at? You're at over 800 deals now? More than 50 million in funding? Yeah, you're getting into the big time there.
well over 50 million in funding. We did about 8 million in just Q4 of last year, Q4 of 2020.
Yeah.
And yeah, you've seen that the types of companies and, the amount of funding that we're driving for inventory has just really gone up exponentially from the early days when we were doing like, $1,000 kind of deals.
Yeah, yeah. Walk me through how this kind of got started. Were you in the e-commerce industry before, or like how did you get started with this?
Yeah, well, I was actually I wasn't as cool as a lot of your customers or your audiences in e-commerce. So I didn't have a website, but I was running a very traditional merchandising company. So we were, taking products off the shelf with manufacturers overseas, updating them a little bit and then offering them as exclusives or white labeled exclusive products to retailers here in America. And, we were doing stuff like 3 foot tall fiber optic Christmas trees and like, you know, survival tools and little stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, it was working well. We had 600,000 in sales in our first year, 100% wholesale business for my business. And that grew to over 1 million of sales in our second year. And as the business scaled up, there was just this pressing problem of, hey, how do I continue to fund the growth for my company? Because my manufacturers aren't going to make me any stuff, right? Unless I pay them. And then after I deliver the goods, I'd have to wait, 30, 60, 90 days sometimes in order to get paid. And so, as the business continued to scale up, it just became a bigger and bigger problem. And I remember, these retailers, they'll do these things like vendor conferences, right? Where they bring all the vendors together and they like talk to everyone. And I remember there was this one vendor conference where they brought us all together. And one of the big topics was how they were going to switch everybody from net 30 payment terms to net 60, and that the vendors that would offer them and agree to net 60 would get preference in getting the orders. And that was so interesting to me because it was this inventory finance problem that pretty much all product businesses face. But this retailer was essentially making, their problem our problem, right? Like all of these little businesses had to extend 60-day terms, but we couldn't get any terms from the factories. And I remember cruising around and talking to a bunch of the other people that were at the conference. And it was crazy how there was just no like one solution. With a lot of things, there's just like, oh yeah, I host my website on Amazon, or I'm on Shopify, or this or that, right? With inventory funding, it was crazy. It was like everything from I'm using a credit card to, my Uncle Joe helps me fill in the gaps when I need to, people using AR factors, but there just wasn't one great solution just for inventory funding.
Yeah.
And I just remember at the time, we were shopping around and I got an AR factor to offer me a 5% discount per month. And I had about a 90-day float. So I was looking at a 15% discount. And on the other side, I'm looking at my bank account and I'm literally earning less than 1% a year, right? And it's like
just to pause there. The AR factor. Can you just kind of break that down? Some of those terms you threw out.
So AR factoring is accounts receivables factoring, where if you're selling to a big retailer, like let's say Target or someone, and they give you a PO and you deliver on that PO, but they're going to pay you in 60 days, you can go to these groups. They're called AR factors. And what they'll do is they'll buy that receivable from you at a discount. So let's say Target owes you, they're going to pay you $100,000 in 60 days. A factor will say, hey, we'll give you $90,000 today, right? And then when it's time for Target to pay, Target's going to pay us, right? So they'll make 10%. That's a kind of typical transaction.
Got it. And obviously the benefit there being you then get the money quickly so you can reinvest in inventory and other expenses and such.
Right, exactly. So it's just a way of improving cash flow and yeah, you can put it back into inventory or whatever else. But yeah, I remember, we were looking at a 5% per month discount from factors. And at the same time, I was earning less than 1% in my bank account per year, right? Less than the rate of inflation. And it was like, all right, why can't we bring these people that have, money sitting in bank accounts that aren't earning anything and connect them to businesses that need to fund inventory and are currently, to me, it felt like, getting raked over the coals. So That was the original idea back in 2014. We incorporated, went through, an accelerator. And yeah, we've been off to the races, growing and trying to get the word out.
Yeah, I think one of the earliest ways to get started there, you mentioned having an Uncle Joe or credit cards, and using credit cards is incredibly anxiety inducing, right? And then you run into limit issues as well. So it's like you're right. There's no really good solution when it comes to that. I think a lot of beginning entrepreneurs, even if they're starting to get more and more sales and purchase orders, it's like, what do I do? How do I deal with that kind of cash crunch, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, are you a finance guy, or did you have to educate yourself about all of these like financial topics and such?
Yeah, no, I'm a supply chain guy. So my background is in supply chain management. I turned that into a merchandising company, and I've just learned all along the way about all these different kind of financial, jargon and such.
Got it. And when you were doing the 1 million in sales, how many like product lines did you have, like different types of products that you were selling then?
Not a lot. We had primarily, 35% of that was 3 foot tall fiber optic Christmas trees. So we did something like 8 containers full of fiber optic Christmas trees back in the day.
That's
And then
a lot of
the
Christmas
rest was
trees.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, dude, it was a lot of Christmas trees. And then the rest was like a smattering of, survival tools. So probably in total, maybe 12 SKUs was driving about $1 million of wholesale a year.
Okay. Wow. That's yeah. And also, you might obviously have the rush there, like with Christmas and the holidays with that. So I
Right,
can only imagine,
exactly.
just if you have an issue, then it's like, oh crap, we're missing out on weeks of sales, or days of sales. It can really mean a lot in that time frame.
Yeah, so we had even a stricter situation where there was a time is of the essence clause on our purchase orders, which meant that if we delivered the inventory even one day late, the retailer had the right to cancel the entire purchase order on us. So
Jeez.
yeah, with these seasonal goods, right, they really put the screws to you.
Yeah, definitely. So you've invented this entire new marketplace, right, which is powered by software, where you're kind of linking up people who want to invest in that inventory, kind of like AR Factor with these entrepreneurs. Is that kind of right, or am I doing too high level there?
Yeah, like it's pretty close. So the idea is that everybody, right, when you're a product business, you need somebody has to pay for the inventory. They have to pay to have the goods manufactured before you get them and you can start selling them. So what happens on Kickfurther is we've got an entire community of hundreds of users who are quite happy to help our businesses pay for their inventory at cost. And then when we have all of those inventory purchases aggregated, we place the order with the factory, have the inventory produced and shipped to the business. And then the underlying contract is a consignment contract. So as the inventory is sold through, our businesses pay our community of users back and we distribute it on a pro rata basis.
Okay, what exactly is a consignment contract?
So consignment, classically, it's like they have these shops. There used to be one in Boulder, Colorado called Clutter. And consignment is essentially the agreement where it's like, hey, I'm going to give you this thing. And if you sell it, you agree to pay me back X, right? And so you have this agreement where I'm going to give you some product, right? And you have the right to sell the product. But if you sell it, you agree to pay me some set amount back. And that's how it functions on Kickfurther. We provide the physical goods. Our community provides the inventory to businesses, and the businesses agree to pay essentially a set cost of goods back to our users when the inventory is sold.
Is this different or similar from like a revenue share?
So it's different from a revenue share because with a revenue share, often that's against all revenues of a business, right? So let's say you've got like a mixed product service business, right? A revenue share would take a slice of every piece of revenue that comes through the door. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Kickfurther, the way it works is we're literally tied down to the SKU level. So if we fund clothing business and we fund their sweatpants, if that business sells some socks or t-shirts, that doesn't trigger the consignment contract for the sweatpants,
Got it. And when it comes to these businesses, so there's obviously the negotiating with the factory. There's then your users, which are kind of crowdsourcing this. Where do you step in the process? Like, are you talking directly with the factory, or where do you step in?
Yeah. So what we've learned is that this business and product businesses, they're so varied, right? The needs of different businesses are, night and day, really. So depending on the way the business has their organization structured, we try to meet them where they are. And what that means is, I'll give you an example. If you have like a brand new business, they might have to pay 30% down and then a 70% deposit when the goods ship, right? And so for a business like that, we might have to fund 100% of the inventory, right? And from the very beginning when they have to place the deposit. If you've got another business that's a little bit that has better cash flow or has been around a little bit longer, what we'll see some businesses will do is they'll pay the deposit themselves and they'll only fund the balance portion of the inventory with Kickfurther because that'll save them sometimes 30 or 60 days instead of just doing the deposit. So we work with the businesses to understand what are their inventory funding needs, and then we essentially turn inventory into cash. And so we can even work with businesses that have recently received inventory from a manufacturer, as long as we can verify that the inventory was produced recently and we fund against the cost basis of the inventory.
And how do you track it? So if someone, an entrepreneur, is raising money on your platform, right? And let's just say they put down the 30% deposit, they're raising the 70%. They're going to take that money that they raise, they're going to go and pay the factory. Factory is going to deliver them the goods. They then start selling those goods. How do you track that in order to secure the return for the investor?
So we usually just tie into whatever systems the business is using to manage their inventory. So we're seeing that the whole market is really moving to digital inventory management, like logistics providers. So, if you're in Fulfillment by Amazon, they've got a great API. We can plug in directly and get the data straight from Amazon, as one example.
Interesting. You're really, in a sense, kind of almost functioning a little bit like a bank, kind of. I mean, obviously, it's not an exact comparison, but it's so interesting that normally a business might tap a credit card or try to go to get a loan from a bank or try and find an investor to fill the space, but you're kind of doing that a bit with Kickfurther there.
So back in the day, small, like the community banks, right? Like under $1 billion of assets were major providers of credit for small and medium businesses. And really after Dodd-Frank, we saw this massive consolidation in the finance sector, and these small community banks like really got hammered. And so that like source of capital for small and medium businesses dried up. And I would say we recognize that there was a big need, and we're trying to help, those entrepreneurs solve that problem. So
got it. So I have a couple of questions here, but before we get into that, do you have like a success story or someone you could share just to kind of make this a bit more tangible? We're throwing around a lot of jargon and metrics and kind of stuff. Do you have a story you could share just to make it a bit more tangible?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a brand on Kickfurther sold almost entirely through Amazon called Tame the Beast. And, when they first came to Kickfurther, I think it was back in, probably a couple of years ago now, they had less than $1 million sales. I think they were around like $350,000 of trailing 12 months revenue. And the first deal they did on Kickfurther was for $20,000 of inventory with Kickfurther. So we funded 20 grand of these, they're like kind of male focused shower products. And they grew from there. And it was incredible to see the growth of this e-commerce brand where within 18 months, they have funded over $1.6 million of inventory with us.
Wow. Wow.
And, simultaneously, their deals were getting a lot bigger. They were able to fund more inventory. We saw, hundreds of % of growth because they were able to just keep growing without stocking out, without any hiccups. And the other thing they were able to do, which I think is very powerful, is because they had access to more inventory funding, they were able to buy in greater quantities with their suppliers, which gives you the ability to negotiate for quantity discounts, right? As you get bigger, you can get better pricing, and then that opens up, potentially opens up wholesale channels for you. And yeah, they just grew like a weed, and we were there every step of the way. And it's, I think those are the best stories where, we find these brands early, we work with them early, and we nurture them all through their growth cycle.
Mm-hmm. So they basically, when they approached you, they're like, okay, we're doing 300K a year in sales, right? And we want to launch on your platform to finance our inventory. Are you helping them with like marketing? Does it work a little bit kind of like a peer-to-peer lending site where there's just tons of people already that are waiting to fund these kinds of deals? Or do these people also have to do a bit of marketing in their own network?
If you qualify on Kickfurther, we have a community that is very, very hungry for supporting product entrepreneurs. So typically, if you go on our website, you can take a look at our recently funded page. We're doing hundreds of thousands of dollars, usually in under an hour.
So, for example, like with Kickstarter, Indiegogo, one of the biggest things that you have to market your campaign, right? In order to get people to care and to pre-order and that kind of stuff. With like Akiva, Prosper, those kinds of sites, right? If you're getting a loan, it's really easy just to get it funded. So yours kind of works more like Akiva, Prosper, like a lending club a bit in that way. Like you have a marketplace where people are just waiting to fund them.
Right, exactly. We have a really active community that's really looking for, as many entrepreneurs and brands as we can bring them.
Is there some kind of like a risk profile that when they go into your marketplace that people will have? So like if I'm an investor, right? And I go on your site and I see a new brand I've never heard of that is looking to raise money to purchase inventory. Is there any information on that brand or like what do you provide in that way?
Oh, yeah. So we have a section, we call it the credibility overview. So essentially, any information that goes into this credibility overview is verified by Kickfurther staff. So often what you'll find there are trailing revenue numbers and, whether or not the business has a personal guarantee, whether we have a PO that's been assigned. And, like with these product brands, right? Like the different businesses have different things that they want to brag about. So depending on the type of business, these stats will change. But yeah, that credibility overview, which is kind of towards the bottom of a co-op, is where we put all of that information.
Got it. Got it. And then for the entrepreneur, when they go on the site and they're like, okay, I want to do a campaign with Kick Further, right? I want to put up when it comes to the inventory, I want to get financing for that. Is there anything that they need to do, like aside from providing this information? Do they need to make a video or like put together a marketing presentation at all, or is it just kind of listing what they want, what they're looking for? If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. Fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately.
So there's definitely an onboarding process, and there's also when you're live on the platform, our users will often post questions in the comment board. If a brand just like disappears and doesn't respond to any questions, they're not going to do very well. So I would say that there is an expectation of being communicative during the funding process and after the funding process. I think communication is really super important when things are going well, and even more so when things aren't going well. So, that's the number one thing, is just this expectation of communication. But the information that you have to provide for a co-op is kind of a lot of it is just the kind of standard marketing language. And if you take a look at any of the deals we have on our platform, it gives you a good idea of the type of information that our community is looking for.
You mentioned the funding duration. What does that typically take to get a campaign funded on your site?
So I would say if we work with our businesses and work with the brands and their partners, right? So we're going to want to verify the cost of goods with the factory that our business is working with. And we have a few other checks that require the business owner to be active. So I would say on the very fast end, it will take us maybe about 48 hours to qualify a new brand on our platform. And once they qualify, when they launch, most of our deals fund in under an hour. So we put a deal. Yeah, we put a deal into Upcoming for 24 hours. It can get up to 50% funded in Upcoming. And then when it goes live, most of these deals are funding in under an hour. And then there's a couple of days for ACH transfers. And then the funds will be ready, 72 hours after that, roughly.
Very interesting. So one of the other questions there when it comes to the deal, are you the one who is deciding what the profit margin is going to be, or is the entrepreneur kind of deciding what that's going to be, or is it like a conversation?
Yeah, I would say, our team has a really good idea and a good pulse on the community about what our community is looking for, and they'll provide recommendations to the brand and the entrepreneur. And we've seen that entrepreneurs will sometimes they'll test out the waters, and you'll get comments from our community that'll say like, oh yeah, this is only 1% profit per month. So I only put in $500. But if it was, 1.5% profit a month, I would have put in $5,000, right? And the community speaks pretty loudly. So we currently let the market decide. I think in the future, we might provide a little bit more guidance than we do today, which is really a recommendation.
So here's a really dumb question. When you come to like the profit margin point, right? So as an investor, like I think of ROI, right? And that makes a lot of sense to me. Or you're thinking of a loan, this is what the interest rate is you have to pay back. Like that makes more sense to me. When it comes to the co-op profit margin, I'm kind of at a loss to understand that. Do you think you could just kind of unpack that a little bit, how that works? When do you realize the return on investment? Is it portioned over a couple of months? Like how do you even forecast that?
Yeah, I mean, so that really depends on the product business, right? So we work with, let's say there's like two general buckets and then a lot of gray area in between. Okay, so let's say one general bucket is wholesale. So with wholesale, we expect that a big chunk of the inventory, sometimes all of it, will be delivered to a wholesale partner like Target or someone else. And then normally those co-ops will pay off in one large chunk or two large chunks, right? Like they'll have two payouts or one payout based on a wholesale distribution plan. If you're talking about a 10% co-op profit margin, that operates as an increase on your cost of goods. So we fund the inventory at $1. The entrepreneur is selling it for, let's say, $2 wholesale. When they sell the inventory for $2, depending on how much they've sold, they pay us back, if it was 10%, $1.10 per unit sold, and they keep the balance there. It's a true consignment contract, so it's based on how quickly and how much of the inventory is sold. So the other typical bucket is an e-commerce business that says, look, we're going to fund 1,000 units and we expect to sell 150 every month. And the way that works is we tie into those inventory systems and we deliver, let's say, 1,000 units to that business. And then we check using their own inventory management systems, hey, how much inventory is left? Okay, there's only 900 pieces left. We're going to invoice for 100 pieces based on, the co-op profit margin. So, we'll invoice for $110 or so, right? And then that gets drawn by ACH and it gets distributed pro rata to the users. So it really depends on the type of business you're funding. And we have a tab for that called timeline that kind of gives you an expectation of when and how long a co-op will take to complete.
Okay. And then would you say that the breakdown from wholesale to e-commerce, is that like 50-50? Are more people on the e-commerce side? What's the breakdown like for the community?
We definitely have a concentration with businesses that have an e-commerce presence. It's one of those things that I think when you've got pure wholesale, you've got AR factors and other sources of potential funding. Whereas when you're e-commerce, I think we're pretty much the best there is for funding inventory on a pure inventory play. So 85% has an e-commerce component, maybe even more than that.
Okay. So just so that I'm writing this down. So you have, let's just say, a minimum order quantity of 1,000 units, right? And the cost of that is $1, we'll just say, per unit. So you're going to need $1,000, right, to be able to purchase that from the factory. And then you're going to sell it, we'll just say 2x, right? So you're going to sell, the entire thing is going to be worth 2,000, right? So under that model, if you have a co-op profit margin of 10%, what would that be essentially for that kind of a?
Yeah, we would increase the cost of goods by 10%. So your $1,000 becomes $1,100 cost of goods sold. Mm-hmm. And the entrepreneur in that case would net $900. And I would just point out that, depending on how good your margin is, if you're working with an AR factors operate as a discount on your sale price. So 10% from a factor would be getting paid $1,800, right?
Mhm.
And you still have $1,000 cost, and the entrepreneur would net $800 in that case.
Okay, and in this example, then the $100 would then be dispersed among all of the people who supported the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. So they put in $1,000 for inventory. We get paid back $1,100. So they get back their original 1,000 plus $100 in profit. And this is assuming, a 10% co-op profit margin, which typically means it takes you about like 6 to 8 months to sell through the inventory.
Understood. So there's almost a little bit of diversification in there as well, because you might be only, I don't know what the minimum amount is you can put in, right? But you're putting in money with other investors there.
Yeah.
You're not putting all the sum up.
Yeah, I mean, so the one of the co-ops we have live today has a pack price of $21.66. So, often to participate on Kickfurther, it can be as little as $20. And, the larger packs of inventory will, sometimes be as much as $1,000.
Interesting. I really like the way that you're incorporating a lot of different things when it comes to crowdsourcing, right? When it comes to kind of disrupting a bit of the supply chain there. It's really fascinating, man.
Yeah, it's been my background. I've always been very passionate about creating more opportunities for regular people to participate in this, slice of entrepreneurship that's always been very near and dear to my heart. And it's felt really great to see that the market has really adopted it. People are pretty happy. It's nice.
So in terms of the alternatives, right? So like if you're increasing the cost of goods in this example by 10%, the entrepreneur is kind of comparing that to other sources of funds, which would be like a credit card, right?
Sure.
What would the difference be there if I was to put this on my credit card versus use something like Click Further?
I mean, it depends on what your credit card rate is. So one of the main differences is that credit cards require you to start paying on them the next month, right? So that can have a pretty painful cash flow impact if you're putting it all on a card because you have to start paying for it right away. Whereas Kickfurther is really pay as you sell based on how much of the underlying inventory has been sold. So that's one key difference. In terms of a pure cost perspective, credit cards will, I don't know, that an APR might be like 28%, which, for Kickfurther is pretty much what you'd be getting on the Kickfurther platform. So you could think like 1.5% co-op profit margin per month for a 6-month long deal would be 9% profit offered in 6 months. Kickfurther takes a 5% success fee that includes, all processing, all transactions. It's a one flat 5% fee, so no hidden charges. And that gets you down to, let's say, 14% in 6 months, or annualizes out to about 28%, right? On a typical deal, I would say we're pretty much at parity with a credit card, with the benefit that it's pay as you sell finance, pay as you sell funding, and it scales much, much better than a credit card scales, right? You're going to tap out on a credit card relatively quickly if you've got a high growth business.
Yeah, and that urgency factor that you mentioned before of you having to pay that back the next month, since you're having to pay when you're selling, there's a lot less urgency and headache on your part as the small business owner.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, the business is really structured in such a way that like we only get paid when the inventory sells. And so there should, it's like hopefully you're selling the inventory for more than you bought it for, right? So,
Hopefully.
there should always be the cash available to pay because it's based on the sales.
Understood. So when you're talking about this with entrepreneurs, what are some of the common reactions you get to this?
I would say probably the most common is, how come I haven't heard about you guys earlier? Or I wish I knew about this a year and a half ago when I was getting started, right? It seems to be a solution that works pretty well. I think our businesses are pretty happy, and it's a public marketplace. So, I always say, don't take my word for it. Reach out to some of these business owners and ask them what has been their experience working with Kickfurther. And I think, I'm very confident that we're going to get positive reviews there.
And what kind of like common points of confusion do you get when you're talking to them?
What we're doing is different. So what we're doing is consignment. So we often have to go through that conversation. What is consignment? How is it different from, a credit card? How is it different from getting a loan from a bank or something else like that? So there are some of those attributes that bear explaining, particularly when businesses are doing their first co-op with Kickfurther. And that's typically, and we get questions of like, all right, how do I compare this? Exactly what you asked, right? How do I compare this to, 28% on my credit card? How do I work that math out? So we help entrepreneurs with that.
So just a couple more questions here. And I know you probably get some of these a lot. So one would be like, what happens when the campaign, what if it doesn't get funded? What happens then?
So with all or nothing, if you don't get funded, we often invite our entrepreneurs to come back, maybe try and fund a little bit less inventory or maybe offer a little bit more profit to improve their chances of success. But there's literally no cost, no fee. If you don't get successfully funded, Kickfurther earns no money. Yeah, everything just gets pushed back.
And when it comes to, let's just say I've purchased a bunch of inventory from the factory, and then I don't know, it gets damaged or something like that, or I'm not able to sell it. What happens then to the investors? Is that just part of the risk of participating on the platform?
No. So once the deal has been successfully funded, the underlying arrangement is that any inventory that is not returned in sellable condition to Kickfurther is due as if it had been sold. So essentially, we're not taking responsibility for the inventory being, like going down with the ship or, having it get stolen or something like that, right? So it's still the business's responsibility to manage that inventory and, take care of it as if it were their own.
Okay. And basically, if they're unable to, then that's kind of an obligation that they have to go forward with.
Exactly. It's due as if it had been sold, if it gets, for whatever reason. And that flexibility is important, right? Because we have businesses that will, for instance, they'll send the inventory as a sample to a potential wholesale buyer, right? Someone at Target is like, oh, this looks cool. Can you send me a sample? Right? We don't want to get in the way of that. So we give our businesses the flexibility to use the inventory however they see fit to grow their business. But if the inventory is consumed for any reason, it is due as if it had been sold.
Makes sense. So just one other quick question, then I just have like one on more the industry itself. So are there any product categories people should be aware of that aren't allowed on your platform? I know with Kickstarter, Indiegogo, there's a whole host of certain ones you can't have on the platform. Are there any ones that are in that kind of box for yours?
Yeah, so we stay away from regulated products. So think ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. And we also steer clear of products that require refrigeration or have a very short shelf life because we just don't want to have that time pressure to dispose of the inventory, if we have to put it through liquidation or something.
Cool. You're obviously a pretty smart guy, and I think you've been able to iron out a really cool niche, right? When it comes to supply chain and providing the service. Are there any things you're seeing now with the supply chain that kind of frustrate you? Obviously you made a solution which kind of scratches your own itch there. But do you see any other things right now that are happening with supply chain technology or the industry itself that frustrates you?
That's a really interesting question and one that I have not received before. Anything going on with the supply chain that frustrates me?
Yeah, or fulfillment in general or manufacturing. It's such an outdated process, as you know.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like that's my biggest frustration is that the industry is very full. There's a lot of people that are kind of like, hey, this is the way it's always been done. And why should we change? And it's like, oh, because the world is changing. And if we don't change, like we're going to lose our place at the table. So there's definitely a bit of inertia in the industry. It's a big industry that's done things in a very specific way for a long time. I think some of the stuff that happened, we had a couple of brands that got caught up in the trade war stuff that went down last year. And that was, I would say unfortunate for them. But, those are those kinds of macro events that you can't really control too much, right? When nations are negotiating,
Yeah, you can't do much about that. When it comes to the manufacturers, like obviously I think the entrepreneurs love you, the people who are investing them that get good money back, like they love you. How are manufacturers reacting to this?
Oh, they love it. I mean, if you've ever been a manufacturer and you've had a business that paid you a deposit, but then they couldn't figure out how to pay the balance, and you're stuck with like all this inventory that you have no idea how to sell, right? Like that's a huge pain for the manufacturers. So when we work with manufacturers, they're ecstatic, right? They know that their clients are going to pay, that they're going to have the funding to pay on time, that they're going to have the finance to potentially order more product in the near future. So yeah, it's a natural fit with manufacturers.
Very cool. One of the things that I would love to see on your site is if you can ever publish any stats. I don't know if you guys have done any blog posts on that, but I think that would be really interesting because you have a very good like swath of e-commerce businesses that you're helping here.
Yeah, we will get there. And I'm very proud of how far Kickfurther has come. We did a nice chunk, $23 million of inventory last year, right? But it's a speck of sand, right? When you look at how big the industry is and how far we have to go. So even today with our current, sample size of, let's say 800 or 1,000 deals or, whatever the exact number is today, it's still very small when you look at the total size of the industry. So I want to get a lot more data. I want to get a lot bigger. And then I absolutely think that Kickfurther is very well positioned to be a thought leader in, supply chain and supply chain finance.
Do you have a final message you'd like to leave with the listeners? It could be a final tip. It could be a word of encouragement. It could be something that you wish you knew when you were back in your e-commerce days selling lots of Christmas trees, right? Anything along those lines.
Yeah, I would say, I think we've all come out of a pretty insane year. It still is, things aren't back to normal, and it can feel like the whole world kind of turned upside down. And I don't know if there's any, Game of Thrones fans out there, right? But I often think of Littlefinger where he says chaos is a ladder, right? And in this hugely disruptive year and in the craziness of everything that's happened, there's also a lot of opportunities. And I think for the right people that have the right positive frame of mind looking at this, I think it can be a very positive world filled with opportunities. And, I always encourage people to try and focus on the positive and to be optimistic and, to look forward and not backwards.
Well said. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate all those advice and tips you shared and also some insights into this new platform. I really hope that you grow a ton more with Kickfurther. It's doing well already, and I wish you a lot of success.
Thanks so much, Salvador. It was great being on the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified Podcast. Now, I know there's a lot of jargon that was thrown around in this episode. I did my best to kind of unpack that for you. If we did miss something, you can always hit me up either on Instagram, or you can hit me up on my YouTube channel, or you can shoot me an email, right? A lot of ways to get in contact with me. But I think when it comes to this is a really great opportunity. And something that you might not, if you're not a good fit, let's just say for equity crowdfunding, or not a good fit for Kickstarter or Indiegogo, which I think a lot of you are, honestly, but some of you might decide to go a different route. This could be a potential another option, right, for you to explore, and something that could be maybe fruitful for you. And also kind of a cool way to get other people involved and to go around these big, I guess, I don't want to say gatekeepers, but honestly, they are gatekeepers, like big banks and people that do an AR factoring, like all of these massive companies. I'd rather, keep it in-house or keep it with small little guys who can help you get funded and bring your story to the world. And then once you're making tons of money, wholesaling, all that stuff, then you can get the big players involved if you want to, right? But up until then, they don't really care. They're just looking for big purchases, and they just want to make as much money as they can, I think, off your product. And me, I'm not super into those kinds of values. I'm more about telling a great story, having a company with good values and ethics, and doing it in such a way that allows you to scale while also being able to get started for not necessarily very big barrier to entry, right? So I don't like the idea necessarily of taking on debt with credit cards. I don't like the idea of having to, have so much risk in your life and so much anxiety of having to do an e-commerce product and figure out the manufacturing, finding the money to do that, and then having to pay it back immediately. So I hope that you took some value out of today's episode when it comes another way to go about doing it. In addition, if you want to talk one-on-one about your specific product, your category, going into an upcoming crowdfunding campaign launch, or e-commerce in general, and how to go about building out your marketing strategy, how to maybe even help with your supply chain, right? There's so many topics under the sun when it comes to this. If you think that I can deliver some value to you, listen to some of my other episodes, you watch my YouTube channel, and you're like, Sal, you obviously have the right sense when it comes to this industry, and you want some of that knowledge applied to you specifically in your business, you can bring me on as a coach for your campaign. To book a one-on-one or a one-off coaching session with me, you can go to the link I'm about to mention and book an hour-long intensive coaching session with me. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching. That is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. Just go to that link, give me a little bit of information about you and what you're trying to accomplish, and we can get that call scheduled ASAP. Thank you so much for being a part of the community, leaving a rating and review on iTunes. I really appreciate it. And every time I see stuff like that, it gets me more excited to put out more content for you, to bring on cool new guests, and to do it with, a labor of love and a bit of fun as well. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.